Welcome back, everyone. We always look forward to this panel. This is the Early Founders panel, and they're going to tell us how they're solving problems in education, the challenges they face. Moderating our panel is Teresa Marchek, who has 20 years of experience driving growth and new product development in all the businesses, banking and healthcare, and of course, education. So we're in good hands. I hand it over to Teresa.
Hi, everybody. It's great to see you here, and welcome to the people online. I'm excited to get a chance to introduce you to three founders whom I've had a chance to get to know a little bit over the last couple weeks, and they all have very different stories. One thing that they share in common is a real strong passion for the problems that they're trying to solve. So I am actually going to let them do most of the talking today. Just a word of housekeeping for those of you that are online. There is a chat there, and feel free to use that both to communicate with yourselves, amongst yourselves, but also to post questions, because at the end of the session, we will be having a time for questions. We want to make sure that you can have your questions answered as well. So we're going to go just right down the line here and start with Josh. So what I'd like each of you first to start with is tell us a little bit about yourself, your company, and the problem that you're trying to solve.
Yeah, so my name is, I don't even know where to look, Josh Thelemann. I'm the founder of Proserva, a growth and development learning management system for educational institutions. My background is, so I'm a former elementary school educator, and I got involved with education in other spaces, policy and nonprofits. I've kind of always been in this, the education space. And with Proserva, initially we started out focusing on K-12 and how do we provide people personalized, dynamic professional learning opportunities. And recently, we've expanded to support licensure efforts around alternative pathway. So, yeah.
Thank you. All right, Chris.
Hi, Chris Nelson. I'm the founder and CEO of Instructiv, and we are focused on building technology solutions that make special education services work better for everyone. I am an electrical engineer by training, never used a day of it. I'm a technologist by trade, spent 30 years in technology, 25 in corporate, the last 5 in startup life. I'm a parent advocate and an advocate for developmental disabilities. My child was diagnosed with epilepsy and developmental disabilities at 18 months, and we encountered the special education system very early on. And it was a what the hell is this moment, and I've got time to make this better, so that's how I landed where I'm at.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jessica Thompson, and I use she, her pronouns, and I am the founder of Designing for Equity, where our mission is to transform higher education into an equitable, student-ready space by engaging underserved learners in the redesign of higher education. So my background is in student affairs, higher education student affairs, and so I was an academic advisor for many years before moving into this role as an entrepreneur. I can't believe I'm saying that because that was never part of the plan. But, you know, through that experience, my personal experience just as a female identifying African-American, first-generation low-income college student, I often felt like I didn't belong in higher education. And I just felt like there was really no platform or space for me to really capture the ears, hearts, and minds of our educational leaders and work with them to transform our higher education institutions. And then in my experience as a professional, as an academic advisor, I will often hear from the organizational leaders that, you know, they want to transform and they're very upset about what they're hearing about the oppressive structures that students have to navigate on a daily basis, but just felt like the policies, the practices, the structure, and the culture of higher education didn't really allow them to connect directly with students, really have a conversation with them, really get to know them on a personal level. And so that's what Designing for Equity seeks to do, engage people across dialogue to address these complex problems.
Thank you all. Actually, my next question had been, how did you find your problem? Many of you actually shared a little bit about that. So what I'd actually like to hear a little bit from all of you, where are you at in the journey with your startup? Where are you? Chris, let's start with you this time.
Yeah, sure. So it really depends on, I think, one of the things that we try to demystify for people up front is who is actually receiving special education services. I think most people that don't understand this field have a vision that, it's the child with Down syndrome or Williams syndrome, and that certainly is a part of that. But the vast majority of kids in special education are kids with specific learning disabilities, speech-language pathology issues, things that have well-known supports and interventions that if they're detected early and assessed early can be done. But if you look at kind of my personal experience and that, my child exists in kind of the intersection of three domains: the education domain, which you have to navigate as a parent, the social services domain, which you have to navigate, and the medical domain, right? So where we're at in that journey is I think I've spent, and I'm an engineer again by trade, so I probably go way deeper on analysis than I need to. I spent a lot of time in the education space, I think, understanding kind of end-to-end from entry point to exit point, what needs to happen, and now we're kind of moving into the healthcare domains and the social services domains to map those out and then try to pull it all together. That's kind of where we're at.
Great, thank you. How about you, Jessica?
Yes, we're a very early stage startup, and so we have conducted a pilot at the University of Minnesota Twin Cities where we brought a group of institutional leaders and a group of first-generation undergraduate students together to think about how they might work together to design implementable, innovative solutions that really promote the success and well-being of first-generation college students. And so that was the first pilot. From that, we were able to raise over $100,000 in capital. And right now, we are working with a local university and a nonprofit organization to think about how they may partner, but also engage with transfer students to increase the workforce outcomes of that student population. So very exciting. It's gaining some traction and movement, but for right now, we're in the higher education domain, with open to expanding, but we'll see where this takes us.
That's great. Josh, how about Proserva?
Yeah, so currently we have folks at, I'd say, like all three of the levels, so K-12, higher ed, and then some, again, I mentioned some work with the licensure. So, but yeah, so folks at each three of those levels, and yeah, recently raised capital and getting really we're calling it feverish customer learning. So really spending these next few months really getting to understand what our users love about the product, what could be improved, and what can be added. So, and then kind of focusing on, or transitioning to focus on, we're calling customer acquisition in the spring then. So really kind of really ramp this thing up.
Great, good. Well, one of the things that struck me when I had a chance to meet all of you again, I think, is that you bring a lot of very unique experiences to the table. I'd love to actually have Jessica, could you share a little bit about some of the biggest challenges that you found at the very early stage of your startup?
Yeah, well, like I just said, becoming an entrepreneur was never in the plan for me. I'm currently a PhD student at the University of Minnesota, and so my dream and goal has always become a tenure faculty. And while I'm still open to that possibility, this opportunity has taken me down another pathway and opened up some new possibilities that I didn't even think about before. But with that, like I said, my background is in student affairs. And so coming into the business field, there's a whole different way of doing, knowing, talking that I had to quickly learn about and self-teach myself. I had to teach myself a lot of this stuff. And so I am grateful for the opportunities that I've been able to take advantage of, such as the John D. Podesta Fellowship through ECMC Foundation. There is a partnership between ECMC Group and Carlson School of Management that provides fellowship opportunities to students who would like to solve grand challenges facing the the education sector, with the emphasis on underserved and underrepresented populations. And so I took advantage of that, not thinking that I would get it, but here I am. And it's really helped me build the capital, make connections, build my network in different ways that I could have never imagined. Some other things I will also say is, like I said, I identify as a African-American, low-income, first-generation person. And so coming to a space that is predominantly white, predominantly male, poses a lot of challenges. I will often hear, why are you doing this work? Well, because it's personal to me. But why? Because it's personal to me. I don't know why I need something else to prove that this is a problem outside of my personal lived experiences, and then the stories upon stories upon stories that I've heard from the students that I have advised over the years. It's like people want numbers, and we can't always quantify a person's experience. We have to listen to them with not only with our ears, but with our hearts and with our minds to really understand and meet them where they are and employ empathy. So that is another part of the space that was a challenge for me. And then also doing equity work with the emphasis on racial justice is really difficult in today's polarized environment. So even having equity in the title of my organization poses some challenges, because people are like, DEI, crit, and they already start making some assumptions, and it's like, no, that's not necessarily what we're doing here. So it's just been really interesting. Like, I can't even say racial justice in some meetings without it rubbing people the wrong way.
Thank you for sharing that. Chris, you've come from a variety of different fields and backgrounds. What have you found most challenging with your latest venture?
Yeah, I thought I have worked across multiple highly regulated industries in my life, so the airline sector, the financial services sector, chemicals, food service. I think I completely underestimated how hard the domain adaptation would be to education by underestimating the bureaucracy associated with it, which has taken, I think, more time than someone I think that kind of was versed as a practitioner in this area. So the good news is it overlaps very strongly with healthcare. So I found healthcare fairly easy to navigate, having learned how to navigate education. But that's certainly been one of the biggest challenges. And I can talk more about advice for founders later related to that. But I think the domain adaptation has been difficult, and understanding the profound difference between perspective of an educator versus perspective of administration. They're entirely two different worlds, and balancing the two is an art form for sure.
Thank you. Josh, I'd love you to actually share, reflect a little bit about what some of your most rewarding experiences have been.
Yeah, great question. I think about, in terms of the application, really shifting or turning on its head how we do professional learning, and understanding from my own experience, I'd sit into this workshop and I try to implement whatever I learned in the classroom, and did that impact my students? And so for me, knowing that we're using these real-time insights to inform the professional learning that teachers are going through, or that are navigating, and understanding and seeing that it is having a direct impact in real time on their students is a huge reward. And then recently, actually, as of this week, one of our funders was kind of curious about, this is all great, but what is the lifetime impact of the work you're doing for the individual? And so we looked at, for some of our licensure work, I'm not exaggerating here, through this work and demystifying, Chris, I heard you say that word earlier, helping demystify this alternative pathway process to licensure, we're helping lift individuals out of poverty. And so, you talk about rewarding and profound impact, profound work, and understanding that for each one of those numbers, that's an individual, and they have families, and then they're in the front of the classroom teaching students, and so just, you talk about reward, pretty profound, and it's pretty, it's recent, because we just discovered that this week, so, exciting stuff.
That's great, thank you. Chris, how about you? What's something that you found particularly rewarding?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of things that are rewarding in this field, but I think probably most recently I'm on the Governor's Council for Developmental Disabilities. They run a program called Partners in Policymaking, which is about half of us are parent advocates and half of the rest of it are self-advocates, people that have come through the system in various ways. And I think immediately walking into this hotel room in Bloomington, or conference room in Bloomington, and be able to just to talk freely about, here's what I think we're up against, here's what I think I'm doing, and having everybody in the room going, yeah, that's it, right? Feels like, okay, we're on the right path. There are enough of us that are behind this that it felt like I'm definitely on the right path of touching something that really needs to be fixed. That's a real problem.
That's awesome, thank you. All right, now one of the points of the session actually is to talk about some different advice that you might have. But first, I'd love to have you reflect on what the best piece of advice that you've ever received are. Jess, could you start, or Jessica?
Yeah, so I received a lot of great pieces of advice. So I would say one of the things that jumps out, or two things that jumps out of my mind, first and foremost, is that you got to trust and believe in yourself. And for a long time, I just thought that this was just a dream and it would never become reality. And I had to take the leap of faith and bet on myself. And so that led to me quitting my job in the middle of the pandemic to pursue this for a time. That was a leap of faith, but betting on myself and remembering that there's how many options of toilet paper on the shelf, how many options of toothpaste on the shelf. So just because somebody else is doing it doesn't mean that you can't do it. And it's okay to reach out to those that are doing it to learn from them about, some of the obstacles that they've encountered along the way, and share resources and things like that. And so that's one piece of advice that I received. And then the second piece of advice actually came from Josh.
Yeah, don't take my advice. That's probably what it was.
Josh and I met a couple of weeks ago as we were preparing for this panel, and we just found a lot of similarities in our experiences and what we. It's all good. And what we. All of them gone.
Oh.
The room has gone dark.
All right. But yeah, so I'll talk a little bit louder. Keep using it? Yeah. Okay. So, the actual piece of advice came from Josh, and I was talking about how, people make a lot of assumptions about what designing for equity is in this polarized context. And so it was starting to frustrate me that people were just like, oh, you're just a critical race theory organization. We don't want to mess with you. So on and so forth, and it was really bothering me. And so Josh was like, do you want to be right or do you want to win? and I had to sit there and pause for a minute like, wow, I want to win. And so it's all about like how are you going to use your energies? Because I could have used my energy to engage in these conversations with them and try to change their minds and all this other stuff. Or I could be like, okay, I appreciate your feedback. Everything isn't for everybody, and keep going with the work and not letting that stop me. And so I appreciate those words of advice.
Great. Any trademark attorneys in here?
Royalties are in the making.
I'm going to turn that over to you now, Josh. What was what's the best piece of advice you've ever gotten?
Yeah, I'm going to follow suit, Jessica's suit, and I have two actually. One was, I read, and one was given to me. The first one that was given to me was when I was younger, but I kept trying to find myself trying to emulate one individual, and someone's like, Josh, we're all our own person, right? And so you need to take these bits and pieces of what you like from these people and kind of become your own person, do your own thing. And I found to be really applicable in a lot of my journeys as an educator, as a nonprofit executive, and now as a tech startup executive. Taking from bits and pieces from what works for other people, what's true, to my North Star, and kind of blazing my own trail with that. And then I'm an avid reader, and one of I love reading about John Wooden's pieces or what he's written, and he has in his Pyramid of Success he talks about don't mistake activity for achievement, and I think what I've seen. In a lot of different fields, especially in startup world, is we gotta be doing something. We gotta be busy. We gotta look busy. Is that wasting time? Is the best use of your time? Is that wasting resources? And so, don't mistake activity for achievement. And there's actually there's a podcast that came out a few weeks ago from Startup Therapy, and it's called "The Case for Growing Slowly." And I loved it because it's unapologetic about just again, sometimes if you're going down a path and you're we just got 100 miles an hour, what was it break things fast, where Facebook's motto was. It's well, yeah, but you go down the wrong path. That's time, the most valuable resource, and capital, and you have no idea if it's working. So the case for growing slowly. Test the water. Is that working? Okay, we can allocate a little more time, a little more resources. And I've also found it's kind of given me a lot more peace of mind, give myself permission to take a step back and thinking critically about this next step or the next move.
Awesome, thank you. That brings up, are there certain, I'm going to go on, we've got a little extra time too, so I'm going to surprise you guys.
Okay.
Are there certain models or lessons or approaches that you found particularly helpful as you've explored what your business needs to be and where you want to go and how you test your way to learn?
Like frameworks, you mean?
Yeah, frameworks or yeah.
Pragmatic marketing was a good framework, I think. I've learned a lot
How
from.
have you used that one?
Well, I mean, like, two of the easy ones from pragmatic marketing are, the statement that your opinion, while interesting, is irrelevant, right? So whatever you think about the particular problem or whatever solution you're building doesn't mean a damn thing until it's in front of a customer and they push and prod at it and tell you if it's going to solve their problem. And that's kind of codified in this statement or acronym that they have, NIHITO, which could be a Spanish or a Japanese word, but it stands for nothing important happens in the office. So get the hell out of the office and get in front of a real client, and that's how you build a product. You don't do it, and your sample size of 10 people. I've talked to 10 people. Yeah, that's you and your cousin and 3 family members. It's got to be like 1,000 people. Maybe I'll start believing you that you're on the right track for building a product.
How about you, Jessica?
I would say 2 come to mind, and first is equity mindedness, and so really approaching all these grand challenges that are posing barriers to the success of underserved learners with the equity mindset, really thinking about not only what is happening now, but what has happened prior to this. What are the historical and social forces that are causing these inequities today, and really solving for the root of it, not just putting a Band-Aid on something. And so that's one of the frameworks or mindsets that we use designing for equity. And then I will also say, similar to your point, Chris, human-centered design, and really getting in front of people, talking to people, not only seeking to just take information, but understand their lived experiences to really gain a nuanced understanding of their communities, their innate skills, talents, abilities, and think about how you can work in partnership together to create something better.
That's great. Thank you. That's one I use a lot when we're doing product development. How about you, Josh?
Yeah, so it's similar to KPIs, which I know since Google put that book out, it's just like blown up. But a mentor of mine showed me way back in the day when I started my first nonprofit, but it's just objectives, strategies, and tactics. And so, your goal really shouldn't change or, unless there's a big pivot. I look at objectives almost like annual targets and, strategies, quarterly tactics, and tactics, what we're doing this week. And what I really like about it is sometimes you look at that objective, that goal, and you're like, how are we going to get there? But the tactics, kind of that piecemeal approach of like every day, this is what I'm doing, and being very deliberate, intentional, right? Like we're going to have this done by this date, and then so you know if you won or lost. And so one, I like is to hold you accountable, but again, it makes everything, even like big, bold goals, a little more approachable.
That's great. Thank you. So my final question, too, that I'd love all of you to be able to weigh in on is, what advice do you have for other people who are potentially in the audience, either in person or online, that might be thinking about starting something? Jessica, I'll start with you for this one.
I would say trust yourself. Trust yourself. Trust that you got something, and that you just may need to do a little bit more research to understand the problem in a more complex and nuanced way, or talk to people a little bit more to dive deeper into it. But trust yourself that you're onto something. And let that, like you said, let that be your North Star. Let that guide you through this work, because it's difficult.
Great, thank you. Chris.
Yeah, I would echo that. I think my attorney really early on said, I admire you for being a founder because you must have an absolutely irrational belief in your own self-abilities, or you wouldn't have done this. Like, I think that's a compliment. Okay, I'll take it. But I think that's true, and in the darkest of days, you have to rely on that, your own self-confidence and your own belief in what the end of your movie looks like to be able to get through that. But the one piece of advice I think tied to that one of my board members gave me, and I guess this is a family show, so I won't say it the way that she said it, but nobody that gives up about you is going to lie to you, right? So the key to temper kind of your strange egomania about being a founder is to find that person whose opinion, even if you don't like it, you're going to have to accept, right? That they care about you, they want you to succeed. They're going to tell you the truth about you doing this, and that's wrong, and this is stupid, and do that, and actually listen to that piece of it. But the voice in your head, you can tell that one to shut up. Other people you can listen to.
I love that, because I do think both of those things have to be present for most people. Josh, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think one, first starting with, thinking with, like, I'd call them gatekeepers, or people who have access to access, is there seems to be, and I don't know if it's everywhere or just here, but almost like this scarcity mindset. And someone once told me, you don't have to lose in order for me to win. And so if someone's reaching out, it's because they have an idea, they want help. They're seeking you out. Like, you possess something there, and it doesn't beat capital. It's just knowledge, right? And so I would say, for the gatekeepers, for people who have access to access, when we're knocking at the door, like, please answer, right? But in terms of advice, I guess on, like, the flip side of that is, like, don't be afraid to ask for advice. I've also found people who are willing to help out more than I could have ever anticipated, right? And really, it was just having the desire, the will to reach out, right? For it can be advice, and then the lengths they're willing to go to support you has been pretty fascinating, pretty phenomenal.
Great, thank you. All right, I'd love to turn it over to folks either here or online. Are there any questions that have come in online at this point?
Just two comments. Really cool panel, great varied experiences, and a good moderator. Thanks to all. And then Lynn Langett says, great panel. I recently invested in Josh's startup, Proserva, angel investment.
No fair.
Thank you, Lynn.
Ringers on the call.
Thanks, Lynn.
I got to say, Josh has had a big week. His Proserva was the finalist for the Minnesota Cup Ed division, and had a chance to pitch for so many people in the Twin Cities on Monday, right?
Yeah. So won the education division a few weeks ago, and then it was part of 9 amazing companies that pitched this Monday for the grand prize.
Yep. Great.
Yay.
All right. Are there any questions for folks here in the audience? Yes.
I have the microphone,
have the
so I guess I can go ahead. I agree, very cool panel. Thank you very much. I was wondering from each of you, what you think may have been a mistake that you learned from that you would be willing to share with us for the purpose of our own learning.
Just one, Deanna? I'm going to be here all night.
I know, that's why I said one.
Well, can I go first? Is that right? So I think it's safe to say this because they're done with their presentations, but don't involve lawyers or VC people too soon. Wait until the absolute last minute for both of those. For lawyers, I think most good lawyers will tell you just don't engage us real early on because they charge a lot of money that you don't have up front when you're starting your startup. So involve them when it's right. And from VC, I think you've got to really be ready for that discussion as well. That, I think, is probably a mistake we made in the first year in both cases.
I would say one of the biggest mistakes I made was thinking that I could do this all by myself. And I learned very quickly that I cannot. There's a lot of things that I don't know. You don't know what you don't know. And so, similar to both Chris's and Josh's point, you really have to reach out to people and build your personal board of directors. Those people that can help you unpack some things and point you in the right direction, share information and resources, and just be, both a cheerleader, but also, like Chris said, a critic too. We need people to be critical in order to push our thinking, to help us evolve and be our best selves. And so that is one of the things that I learned very, very early.
Yeah, I think it goes back to something I mentioned earlier, the case for growing slowly. And I think part of that is being extremely deliberate and intentional, when seeking out advice. And again, assuming it's a product or a software, wireframes, MVP, who are those first people that are testing it, and making sure, again, it's not your cousin, your 3 family members, what have you. But, it also goes back to the point Jessica made too, like, yes, you need to incorporate that feedback, that critical feedback, and sometimes it's a tough pill to swallow, but also no one knows where you're headed better than you are, right? And so how do you not let people kind of derail? Like, you got to incorporate that feedback, but also not have them derail you from kind of what it is your end goal, what your mission is. Because again, ultimately, no one knows that better than you. It's a tough balancing act. One I'm still trying to figure out. So.
Other questions, either in the room or online?
I have a question. He's closer to me, so I'm just. It would be weird if he ran over there and had to come back to me. I'm curious, like thinking about your business today and the future of your business, this inevitable growth and need to build out your team. How do you think about adding team members, whether it's the need to break through bureaucracy or to get into new gatekeepers? How do you guys think about, adding anyone new to your team?
I'll take that first. Well, I mean, I think hopefully you heard kind of the presentation earlier today around, in my world, if I look at a tech startup, right, there just aren't enough people here in that. So we have to start, I think, as a state economy, start building out that pipeline of people. But two things that I would say about where those people are going to come from. If you were in that presentation, 70% of the people that are born in Minnesota stay here. So there's a book called Headquarters Economy. Does everyone know about this book that Miles Shaver, Carlson School of Management, wrote? He moved to Minnesota and couldn't explain to any of his friends why the hell anybody would move to Minnesota because they thought it was all igloos and slag dogs and things like that up here. So he got sick of not having a good answer about why there were so many Fortune 500 companies, so he sought out to figure out why that is, right? And one of the reasons is that people come here and they stay here, right? And then they move around from piece to piece. So what I would say, in direct answer to that, you got to build a pipeline, and you got to start building that pipeline of future resources as early as K through 5, right? And bring it in and start, maybe work our way backwards on that piece of it. But we also, and EdTech in particular, I'm not from this field, it's been hard to break into. It's hard to break into healthcare if you don't have a practitioner background. I'd ask people in the field to start thinking about that cross-pollination, about allowing people outside of it to look at it. Because I look at the problems in EdTech, and I'm like, this is core case management workflow problems. This is a lean, just eliminating the waste and weight in the process, and you guys would get 50% productivity. And they're like, no, it's really special, and we're different. Yeah, okay, everybody's different, right? So let people in, but also to educators. Like when we think about the value that you would bring by moving from education into the EdTech space, it's incalculable, that piece of it. So I think as a combination of those factors, but kind of breaking down barriers and rethinking about what's good about Minnesota and why we're successful. I mean, a lot of the companies here that are big, Fortune 500s, the Targets, the Best Buys, the Medtronics, well, they didn't transfer here. They were born here, and they're still here, right? So there has to be some good cross-pollination that needs to happen.
So I want to double check. Was your that loved your wisdom on that? Was your question about people on the?
I just want to hear them speak about how they're thinking about building and growing their business.
Yeah.
The connections they make and the people that they take on and the reasons for that, depending on where they are in their stage and what they truly need. Right?
Could you all talk a little bit about what your teams look like, if there are? I mean, I think you're all at very different stages at this point, so I'm really curious.
Yeah, so we are now, including myself, a team of 3. Brought on our 3rd person this week. And it's funny because this individual is a former associate superintendent, and he's really big on like strength find. I mean, he's like, Josh, we need to do your strength find. We need to figure out what you are. It's partially we start thinking about who do we need to bring on, but I do think, gosh, in one of these investor meetings, they asked me what my superpower was, and I was like, or my strength was, and I was like, my strength is I'm hyper aware of my strengths, my weaknesses, right? So just constantly trying to fill in those gaps. One, it's a humbling experience, but also, I mean, again, being hyper aware of what, because when you're a company of one, what are you lacking, right? Not just your software, but you, and who can you go out, like the top to kind of go out and fill that in. So, yeah, we're a lean and mean team of 3 now. Again, credibility, and then if you know me, I'm not an organizational type A person, so bringing in a former national chief of staff as well to kind of, I don't know, keep the blinders on, we'll say, kind of keep me focused on the task at hand.
So part of what I'm hearing there, it's not just about what functional knowledge they have, it's also about what other sort of, how they culturally fit with the team and what gaps they might fill when you got a small team like this, just being able to make sure you guys can cover each other's.
Yeah, because culture starts with the first 10 people, the first 10 hires, right? So like one of our hires, right before she had started, she let me know that, never mind. I should be sharing this, so. Culture starts with your first 10 hires, that's all I'll say. So be mindful and cognizant, of who you're bringing on early on, because they're going to develop the culture of your company moving forward.
Chris, what does your team look like right now?
Well, there's 4 of us, mostly in the research space, the policy side of it and the product side of it. One of the things I went through accelerator earlier this year in Silicon Valley, and one of the things about going through an accelerator you learn is how bad you are at all these various disciplines like sales and marketing. You learn acutely the things that you suck at, and you have really smart people telling you how badly you suck at them. So that helps you kind of frame what you want and where your weaknesses are and where you want to hire to. So that's kind of why I moved from, everybody wants to say they're the founder and CEO of a company, but like, I don't want to pitch shit. I don't want to talk to sales stuff. It's not where I'm good at, and I think there are other people that could do it better. So I moved over to the product side, and that's kind of where we're filling in. But I would say the other thing coming out of that, like everybody in the world is looking for, is the hands-on developer, chief technology officer. That's what, if you're a software developer right now, you should definitely be looking at CTO roles, because there's like a million people that are looking for developers to fill in that role.
Jessica, your business model looks different. What do you have a team at this point?
No, I'm a team of 1 right now. Yes, a mighty one. But, like I said, I'm a full-time PhD student, too, and I think that it would be irresponsible of me right now to bring on anyone else on my team. I do believe, like I said, I am very intentional about, connecting and building my board of directors. But like I said, it would be irresponsible for me right now to bring on somebody because I don't have the time to invest in their development.
Makes sense. Thank you. Good question. Other questions?
Yes, Teresa, I had a question really about the customer discovery and customer product fit phase. For me, for the startups I've been involved with, those have been kind of crazy times, because I've gone into both of those phases thinking, well, I really know what I am. And I came out of both of them thinking, I've got a lot of work to do. So I'm just wondering if you have stories about that phase of your development, what you learned, did you change? I'm assuming you didn't pivot, but what were those phases like? What was the method you used, if possible? And were you able to be flexible? It's a hard thing for some of us.
I can go first. So I was fortunate enough to get really good counsel before I started this from people that had spent, kind of many, many years in the education space. And one of the best pieces of advice that I got before I started that process was that your core competition in education is the status quo, right? So if you go into that thinking that really that's what you're up against, right, versus up against other people, that's really what you're fighting against. And then you can kind of deconstruct, like I'll talk about K-12 for a second. K-12, you can boil it down to a game of money and power, right? The educators have a lot of the power because no one's going to buy anything without their consent and without it being there. But the administration, right, has basically the money, right? So you gotta look at it. The way we approached it was in terms of buyer persona being very different than user persona, right? So the people who use your product and who are going to be advocates, and for most cases in education, I would recommend guerrilla marketing, door to door, having the educators be the grassroots movement for your product. They have a very, very different set of needs than the administrators do. And if people don't think administration is political, attend a school board meeting sometime and look at what the superintendents have to go through, and you'll understand how political it is. But that's kind of how we approached it. And understanding that split between buyer and user persona, I think, is really core. And then you can kind of shift where it goes from there. And even on the buying side of it, it's done by committee, and you need to understand layers within that. But that would be my counsel.
I would just add one layer to that, beneficiary too.
Right.
At least I think, to date, the buyer are higher education institutions, and not just universities, nonprofit, workforce, all the different players that are in the higher education space. So those are the buyers. Now the users, the people that would be I'll be working on a one-to-one basis with to actually implement the services, are most of the time the administrators, and in this case, a faculty. They control a lot in the higher education space, but they're often overlooked. So do not count faculty out if you're coming to work in higher education, especially if you're thinking about working with research institutions. And then, students would be the primary beneficiary. So also have to understand, what are their needs, what are their experience, what are their pain points in order to create services and products that really meet them in their needs.
I think it's easy to want to seek out perfection with your product, and perfection is never going to happen, nor should it when you're building out a product. And so I think, and I read somewhere that when you look back at your MVP, your minimum viable product, you should be disgusted with it. And so the sooner you can get feedback, right? The sooner you can get feedback from your customers, right? And they begin to inform it. One, so again, like lean and mean, so our core infrastructure hasn't changed, but how it's being leveraged, things that are being built on top of it, are being informed by the very people that are using our platform and will be using it. So again, don't seek perfection. It's not going to happen. And I think, it's almost like an excuse not to get started. Well, if I just got this one thing, then it's a rocket ship. Yeah. You got to get out the door at some point. And then again, at your MVP, you should be disgusted with when looking back on it, because again, that means you're iterating and incorporating all that feedback from your customer base.
Or if you're Craigslist, your MVP just becomes your product forever, right? You never really get past that.
All right, thank you. Any other questions? We've got time for one last question if there's something in the room or online. Anybody online? Okay.
The happy hour on the roof.
Yeah, I know. I think there's one more session. Thank you all for taking the time to come and to listen, and thank you all for sharing your stories. It's just been great to, again, spend a little bit of time with you over the last couple of weeks, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you.
Let's put our hands together for this great panel.